Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Double Dragon 2, The Revenge, brought to us by Acclaim. Originally released in arcades in December of '88, the NES version would follow up in December of 1989. This is the version of Double Dragon I have played the absolute most throughout my life. It was one of my earliest beat-em-up experiences. This game is a bit different from its arcade counterpart. The NES version includes 3 different difficulties that does shorten the game if you play on anything but the Supreme Master difficulty, which you will need to play in order to fight the final boss. Interestingly enough though, in the Famicom version of Double Dragon 2, there actually isn't that, where you actually can play on any difficulty and face off with that Supreme Master final boss. It was changed just for the NES version, which I guess gives you that extra incentive to play on those harder difficulties. As a kid, I have to admit, I was always disappointed in a game where I really tried to beat it on the normal difficulty, only to get to the end and say, hey, try on a harder difficulty. The worst games are the ones where you do the harder difficulty, and then it just flat out says, hey, congrats, you beat it on harder, you're cool. Never really felt that great, did it? Anyway, this is Double Dragon 2, The Revenge for the NES. I'm going to be playing as Billy Lee here. You have Billy and Jimmy Lee returning. There are 2 different play modes, single player and multiplayer. With the multiplayer, there's 2 types, A and B. Basically, you can hurt yourselves on B mode, and on A mode, you can't hit each other. The key to success in Double Dragon 2 is mastering the special moves. The 3 biggest being the uppercut, the jumping spin kick, and then the flying knee smash. And that flying knee is devastating, and once you master it, you can really start to bowl through the enemies in the title. The way that you're able to pull off these moves is a bit weird, and as a kid, I never really got the timing down. It took until I was older to kind of get a nice rhythm to it, and even then, it can be tricky to pull off on command. To do these moves, you need to first jump. Just like with Double Dragon 1, A will punch in one direction while B punches in the other, and pressing them together causes your character to jump. Once you land, you're on a single knee. There's a frame of animation with your character on that one knee. It also happens when you get knocked down to the ground. You'll be on that one knee. Once on the one knee, you then need to press in the buttons to do the different special move command, whether it be the uppercut or flying knee. If you want to do the spin kick, you're going to want to do the double press of the buttons while in mid-air. The flying kick looks really cool, but honestly isn't as effective as the flying knee as far as being able to attack enemies. As you can see, when you land and you're able to pull off that knee, enemies not only are flying away, you're doing devastating damage, defeating a lot of them in a single or maybe 2 knees at most. The first boss of the game is Burnov. This big guy, of course, can land in some pretty devastating moves. We're going to try to best him from afar, doing the jump-in maneuvers and then either pulling off the flying knee or the uppercut. Thankfully, in the game, when you pull off a special move, as long as you're able to hit the move on the enemy, even if they hit you at the same time, you're going to still deliver that damage, which is very devastating. During the burn-off fight, he kind of fades away and fakes you out at first, and then reforms for one last kind of go. I always thought that was kind of cool, and interesting that they kind of throw that guy at you right away from the get-go. There aren't a ton of enemies throughout Double Dragon 2, so while I didn't talk about a lot of them in the first level, we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about them throughout the game. A big part of the game is platforming, sadly, which this game does not do well. I've always had problems with the platforming, especially in later levels. After first working our way down, we're now going to climb up the set of pipes after dealing with a series of those roper enemies. Then, after a little bit, this helicopter will come in. You can stay on the bottom part to kind of avoid the fire. Thankfully, it doesn't do a whole lot. The helicopter will then start dropping enemies, including a set of Lindas, followed by a set of Williams. These guys are a bit more annoying when they have a weapon. You can pick up their weapon and use it against them, which can be pretty devastating, but thankfully the special moves end up still pulling off more. You'll run through a series of enemies, including a set of right hands. There's guys with like the white jackets and a little bit of red on their face. They can be pretty much a pain. They work as kind of a mid-boss. That spot there, you can thankfully launch a lot of the enemies right off the buildings, as you saw. Not long after that, the helicopter is landing, you have some more enemies. You start off with a couple of ropers before you're attacked by a set of ninjas, one on the left and right, which is a bit annoying. If you can get them all on one side, it works pretty well. I actually didn't even mean to pull off that flying spin kick, but it worked pretty efficiently against the ninja there. If you time it right, you can actually hit both of them right away with one of your special moves. Because of their speed, they can be a bit annoying, but I find those flying moves, whether it be the special ones or just a standard kick, can land and do pretty good damage. After you defeat the ninjas, the helicopter takes off, and we're moving on to the next level. The NES version here of Double Dragon 2 is vastly different from the arcade game. Every level outside maybe the first one is completely different in its design, though it follows the same story basically. Level number 3 has us battling on a plane. We start off with a couple of right-hand enemies. The whole time you're on this level, you have to be very careful because the door consistently opens and you can get sucked out. The good thing is, the enemies can also get sucked out, including boss enemies, so you can use that to your advantage to kind of help you out. Because of it pulling you, it can also be a bit hard timing with the special moves. I find it in this area. The boss, after a few sets of enemies, is big old BOLO. He's a Bobo, but with hair, basically. I try to get BOLO, the first one, to go near the door, but I'm unable to pull it off, but just a couple of special moves thankfully do the job. On the second BOLO, though, he walks right into that door, and as you can see, he gets sucked right out, and that instantly completes that boss encounter. We're moving on to the next level. A lot of the missions in Double Dragon 2 aren't particularly long. The game can make up for it though in the difficulty. These enemies, especially ones that can throw things, are exceptionally annoying. That's why it is very much a key to mastering being able to kind of jump in, pulling off those special moves. You can also, of course, attack enemies and, if you time it right, grab them in order to pull off a couple of cool moves as well. After dealing with a set of ropers at the start of the stage, we then have a set of Linda enemies before entering into this door and then traveling down an elevator. Once we reach the bottom here, this is where things get really tricky for this stage. You have all these spikes lining the ceiling, so unfortunately that means we cannot pull off any of our jumping moves. You can still do special moves once you get attacked, so you can kind of like bounce your head against them intentionally, and that would instantly set you up for that one knee if you want to, but it's kind of hard to do. Here we're introduced to a boar, another big muscly guy. He can pull off a really devastating shoulder tackle, and it's kind of weird the way it hits you very quick and can reach a good distance. So farther away moves work best, but since you're in tight quarters, try to just get in and mash your attack button to at least pull off some quick combos on a boar to try to get rid of him. A little bit down the ways, we'll come to this small corridor, so thankfully in the center, you can jump and pull off moves if you want, or at least want to attempt it. We first deal with a set of Lindas before Williams, armed with knives, end up dropping down next. You can pick up the knives and launch them at them if you want, but it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. In this tight space, just kind of standing in the center, I find with those quick combos, ends up working rather well to try to get rid of most of these people. After you deal with the set of Williams, though, you will deal with another BOLO enemy like we did on the plane. We're going to jump in the center and try to pull off the flying knee. As you can see, it's difficult sometimes, and even when I really am trying to pull it off, it can be a little sticky. You have to get it exactly right for when you just get on that knee, you then press the buttons. The worst part about this level to me, though, is the end. You just fought a boss, you've already been through a tough part, but you're not over yet. You have to make a jump over this conveyor belt segment to hit the door on the left side in order to officially exit out of the level. I've died a lot of times in that small room. Thankfully, the next level, the forest, is a little bit more open. This way we can pull off our moves and maneuver around a bit easier. We're going to drop on down and then make sure that you go to the ladder down here to make it safely to the bottom area here. Start off by going to the left. You'll be attacked by Lindas. One of them has the whip. You can pick up that whip and use it, which does a pretty darn good amount of damage. Unfortunately, though, you won't be able to hold on to it for very long. After that, we're going to go up here. You can decide which area you want to jump, either the top platforms or the bottom. I usually go for the top ones just because it's only 2 jumps that I have to make. Like I said, platforming in this game was not its strong suit. One of the other major differences from the NES version to the Famicom version is actually being able to continue. In the NES version, when you game over, you can continue, but you need to put in a cheat code in order to do so. However, in the Famicom version, you can actually just continue. There's a little menu, and you can hit continue once you end up getting that game over. At the top of this area, after dealing with a set of ropers, we then have a couple of bolos. Because of the platform that we're on, hit them with a devastating flying move to at least knock them backwards, and you can instantly get them off that cliff to complete the battle easily. Here we have a couple of enemies. Chin, that was also in Double Dragon 1, masters of Bojutsu, or stick fighting. They'll be able to attack you with a series of not only attacks with the stick, but also they can somersault and kind of cartwheel their way away from you. This can be a bit of an annoyance for sure, but a lot of times they can also flip into your special moves, or just at least flip into you where you're able to pull off a quick move. After that though, you have this big giant tank machine end up coming on. It moves back and forth and spews steam from a couple of pipes, so be very careful of that. Once you reach the top platform, enemies start to pop out. If you're able to get on the left or right side, you can either pull off quick punching combos, or you can try to pull off special moves quickly if you're able to do them more on command. After a set of roper enemies, you then have the right hand make another appearance. This enemy was created just for the NES version, along with the ninja enemies that we dealt with earlier on in the game. After a couple of right hands, we then have a boar make appearance. Thankfully, this time around with a boar, we're in a bigger open area, so we can actually pull off special moves. His devastating shoulder tackle, as you can see, can still hit me even from a good distance, but thankfully it doesn't take too many hits to knock him down, and we're moving on to Mission 6. The Mansion of Terror is probably my least favorite level. You have these flaming torches at the top that drop down. They're really not the issue. The big issue? Spikes. They cause instant death, just like pits in the game. Because of this, you need to really time the few jumps that you're going to need to make, especially the one at the end of the area. Once we make it here, we have enemies popping out of the left and right doors. You can kind of lure them to the center platform, or jump off the center platform to set up your special techniques if you want to do that, or just stand by one door, try to take out the one guy before the other one's even able to get to you. The chin enemies, of course, are going to move a little quicker, so a lot of times I like to get them on that center platform and pull off quick combos or special moves if I'm able to. Now comes the difficult part of the level. Make sure you get the entire area on screen. If you're familiar with Mega Man games, disappearing and reappearing blocks, not one of my favorite things to do in any platformer. Here we have to do that in Double Dragon with its platforming. Just time it right. When they're starting to flash, you're going to want to do your jump, that you make it safely. Thankfully, you got to go all the way to the left and then to the right to the door. And once you get in, thankfully that is the end of the mission. It's not a long level, but because of the spikes and being instant death, you can still game over pretty easily in that level. Mission number 7 continues the wonderful joy of platforming in Double Dragon 2, starting off immediately with a conveyor belt segment. This second jump trying to get to the one below, or just jumping and trying to get through it, has always been a pain to me. The next room is thankfully a bit easier. We have to deal with a burn-off enemy, but thankfully you can kind of knock him to the left once the platform starts disappearing to instantly kind of complete that fight a bit quicker. Once he has been defeated, you'll move into that next room. Next room is more platforming. We have gears that spin every few seconds, along with devastating spikes that pop up from the bottom. While the spikes won't do a whole lot of damage to you, they can potentially hit you in midair, causing you to land on spikes, which will then end in an instant death. Be careful of that last jump to get into the upper left door. We then have pretty much a similar situation to what we just dealt with in the previous room like this. The only enemies you'll have to deal with is a set of the roper enemies. They drop these annoying flame bombs or grenades that end up going off. Thankfully, the grenades can also hurt them. Just focus on pulling off a couple of combos. Once you've taken out the set of 3, you'll be able to go through the door. In the next room, you have a couple of layers here and a couple of doors that enemies are going to be popping out of. Starting off with a set of Williams guys that will launch those knives at you. They don't do a whole lot of damage, so I usually just try to avoid them, though it can sometimes be difficult to get around not picking up the weapons. Next up, more fun with flame grenades. Thankfully you're on a bigger platform here, more open, so you can avoid them a bit easier this time. We are nearing the end of this level here. We have another set of right-hand enemies that come bunched together. You can pull off a nice timed special attack. Unfortunately, I didn't do so this time around. Once you deal with both of these right hands, we then have one last fight against a boar. Another one of those battles before we're finally able to wrap up this stage. Immediately I'm able to get in. You can pull off a quick combo. He'll then start kind of going for those like shoulder tackles, so I just kind of beat him to the punch as much as I can. Mission number 8 is the final level if you're playing on the normal difficulty. The game will end after level 3 on easy. The final level of the game, though, after this is just that final boss encounter. So this is really the kind of like the last stage of the game. After dealing with that set of enemies, be careful working your way around to this big door. A couple guys will pop down. A few years after this release, in 1993, there was actually a PC Engine CD version of Double Dragon 2 released based off the NES version. It's mostly the same, but unfortunately, of course, was only released in Japan. It featured a different soundtrack pretty much altogether and a few other changes, so if you're a big Double Dragon 2 fan and have never played that version, I recommend checking it out. You can either climb down the ladder, just drop straight on down, and you'll immediately be greeted by a giant muscle boar guy. Watch out for that shoulder tackle like always, and hit him with a few devastating moves in order to keep him away. Right after a boar, you'll have a rematch against BOLO. Big old BOLO, watch out for those kind of devastating punch moves. He can hit pretty quickly, but since he moves slowly, it really does allow you to kind of get those jumps in for those special techniques. The same can't be said for the next set of enemies, a pair of ninjas that we dealt with earlier on in the game, though if you do time it right, you can kind of hit them both as they immediately run onto the screen. They of course flip and fly everywhere. I find of course like if I can hit special moves, especially after they knock me down, that ends up being pretty efficient for getting through. Right after that fight though, it's the actual boss for the stage, your doppelganger. This is a pretty annoying little fight, of course, him having different special moves to be able to hit you, and he's pretty damaging once he's able to make combos. However, if you can pull off a nice steady stream of jumping and landing, it kind of fakes him out a lot of times, and you'll be able to pull off special moves of your own before he pulls off one of his. After he drops, we have a cutscene before we enter into that final boss encounter. When the level begins, you just have kind of Marion standing there. As soon as you make contact with her, though, that's when the boss encounter begins. The mysterious warrior makes his appearance with another little cutscene before the final fight actually starts. Now, the mysterious warrior was only in the NES and in the PC Engine CD version of Double Dragon 2. In the arcade, it's actually Willie, the same guy who was involved in Double Dragon 1. I find it fascinating that they decided to change it out. I don't know if that character just wasn't as interesting, so they went with this one instead. But they made a tough fight. He can disappear. When he does, I usually just find myself mashing attack in whatever direction he disappeared from. That's usually the best way to kind of get at least a few hits in to knock him back down to the ground. This fight is broken up into 2 parts, so you can see that once you made it into the throne room area, you know you're getting close to the end. Since he is so speedy and tries to get away from you, a lot of times when you're doing your jumps to try to pull off those special moves, he'll flip away from you. Just keep attempting them till you're able to finally land. If he gets close, pull off that quick combo. Once you land enough hits though, you'll take him out and get to enjoy the ending to Double Dragon 2: The Revenge. After that ending, where we get to see Marion kind of be resurrected, in the original arcade version, it's different, more bittersweet. This version, they decided to make it a bit of a happy ending, at least. So, doing that harder difficulty, fighting that final boss, you get a nice, at least happy end to the Double Dragon 2 experience. Double Dragon 2: The Revenge is by far my favorite, most nostalgic Double Dragon game. I have so many fond memories of not only playing it by myself, but late nights playing it at sleepovers with my cousin and some of my early childhood friends. What is your favorite version of Double Dragon, or what's your most nostalgic memory with this long-running series that we've seen even popping back up in recent years with a few new releases here and there? After that last embrace with Marion and Billy, we get to see the Technos screen, followed by the end, and that wraps up Double Dragon 2: The Revenge, and also brings this episode of Play It Through to a close. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.